Hello and welcome to the Wise Women podcast. We are so happy to have you here. My name is Kathy. You may know me as my online presence, the Blue Butterfly, and I'm a natural intuitive and a Reiki master and a big believer in our connection to our ancestral past and all the spiritual stuff that goes with that that's still within us. And I'm also a massive history nerd, so I love to research history. And with me, I have my wonderful co-presenter, who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway. This is Wynne Abbott. Hello, Wynne.
Hello, everybody. Hi.
And she is an artist and an author and an all-round very interesting, very wise person, hence the Wise Women. I think she's a bit wiser than me.
Oh, I don't think so.
We're really delighted to have you with us. And today we are talking about sacred rites, sacred rituals. And these are the rituals of life, basically. And so we have birth, we have childbirth, we have marriage, we have death today. And we did all the way back as far as you can go. But they were honoured slightly differently. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today, looking at cultures from the past and how we are kind of coming full circle today with this and see what we have lost because these connections to these really important milestones in our lives are so important. So I'm going to pass you over to Wynne to start. And Wynne, tell us more.
Well, yeah, I think that we have a lot of rites, sacred rites and things that have kind of forgotten some of the past ceremonies for birth, child becoming an adult, death, were very rich and very meaningful. And we've lost so much of them in a lot of the world. Now, for a whole range of reasons, there isn't just one reason. I mean, sometimes it is because we've evolved, people see things differently. Some of it is due to the fact that it was a forced change by religious kind of pressure and some by political pressure. So there isn't a single reason for things to just disappear. But what we're talking about is very important transitions in life where you come. So you've got, the first one is birth, coming into being, and then the coming of age. And so and certainly in the West, we don't do a lot of those ceremonies anymore. I mean, we all celebrate birth. We often don't celebrate, we kind of celebrate our children becoming a teenager, but we don't really celebrate the deeper meaning behind that quite often. But there are clear moments when, like, for instance, as a child becomes an adult. So from birth we welcome a soul. The midwife is there to welcome that soul into the world, and it's wonderful. When we then get to around about the ages of 12 to 13, we start to go from childhood to adult. So, if we look at the Jewish, they had the bar mitzvah for the boy, which means son of the commandment, and actually this was in the early 1920s, I think. They started to have similar ceremony for girls coming of age. Prior to that, they didn't really. In kind of some of the indigenous, the Native Americans in America, then they did have, they had some wonderful, rich ceremonies. So for the boys who would get to, they identified that probably when the boy's voice was about to break and they were starting to go crackly. They were around about 12, 13, and that was a sign that they were becoming an adult. So they would undergo certain ceremonies with the male members of the family or the important elders of the tribe. And that was to prepare the boy for becoming a man. So to teach him. So some of those might have involved going into sweat lodge as well. So there would be a whole range of ceremonies. It was a very important time.
And I know that in Africa they did that, and I think they still do, some tribes in Africa.
Yeah.
So they would be very often, I don't know if this still happens, but centuries past, the boys would live with their mother to a certain age, and then they would be kind of, it was organized, but they'd be kind of kidnapped and something put over their heads, and they're taken off somewhere, and they go into the jungle, and then they take these things off, and then they're put through these like quite grueling sort of tasks, and they have to learn how to catch something to hunt, to eat, something that's really difficult to find. They get different challenges. They learn to work together. They learn to work separately. And then when they get to the end of it, then their father is there to kind of welcome them into manhood, the manhood ceremony. And with the bar mitzvah, I know there is the cutting circumcision, and and these African tribes, I don't know if they still do. So don't shoot me for that. But I hadn't really looked into this again. But when you started talking about it, it reminded me, and I know they did do that. So this was like all over the world, wasn't it?
Yeah, and indigenous Aboriginals, they would go on walkabout. I mean, but these ceremonies that they did were about testing endurance and strength and the ability to protect the tribe. And just as an aside, because I'm going to talk about kind of the indigenous Native Americans. One of the things that the men would often be fed first. And it wasn't because the women were seen as a lower in priority. It was because the women were seen as sacred being, because they brought forth new life. They brought through creation. So the men would eat first because they needed to be strong to protect the women, so that they could then create. So I read a kind of a lovely account of this by an elder, a Native American elder, and he was explaining that he said it was no way that it was because of a hierarchical thing. It was because, and as from when they've done the kind of child to adulthood, they have roles, and the female role is obviously about creation, and they need to be strong, and they can't always, if they're having babies, can't always go out and
I didn't know that. I love it when we learn stuff from each other on here, because believe it or not, folks, we don't rehearse any of this.
I think under today's kind of understanding, it would be easy to look at that and think, it's patriarchal, it's but they were very clear that it wasn't about that, and that the women were held in really high regard. I mean, there's lots of different cultures, there's lots of different tribes, and this is just one particular story. But so the boys would then go through that child to manhood with the men of his family and the tribe. And when they went to the sweat lodge, it would only be male members that went in with him. The female ceremony was known as a sunrise ceremony, which I think is a really nice name.
Is that Native American? Is it sunrise ceremony?
It's Navajo.
Oh wow!
Actually, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is. But I mean, what they would do is they celebrated a white painted woman, and it was about creation and fertility and renewal. And it was a very important ceremony for girls. So when they started to menstruate, they were then seen as they are now a woman, they can create. But their ceremonies lasted for 4 days, and a lot of things, nearly everything in that culture would be 4, 8, or 12, multiples of 4, because 4 was a sacred number. It was the 4 mountains, it was the 4 elements. So the girls would then have to go through their ceremony, and the tribe would dance around her, and there'd be all sorts. On the last day, she would have to dance all night, and that was to test strength and endurance. She wouldn't be dancing by herself. There would be, with it. But it was about keeping the tribe strong, and so that was. It was actually. I've seen images of some of the ceremonies, and I actually went to a ceremony many years ago, and it was just not not a kind of child to adult ceremony, but it was just wonderful to kind of see it and take part in it, even from an observer. So it was really fantastic, and I really like that there's so much depth in those ceremonies.
Well, it's marking those times. It's marking those times and accepting their importance. Whereas in the Western world, we very often just think like, right, we're going through this phase, this phase, this phase. I know we talked about the maiden mother crone, but last time I think it was. But this is a whole different thing, and it is honouring these milestones instead of just thinking, well, you just kind of get on with it as we do over here.
Yeah, and I think that their ceremonies were so rich. Now, we talk a lot about ancestral memories and things being passed down, but in 1883, the United States introduced a code of Indian offences, and they banned most of the ceremonies. They banned them.
I've got to say, sadly, this is not a surprised face.
No.
Because you know what I think about, the colonisation, empire, and I think we're both on the same page with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So they banned it, but they often still took place in secret. And what did continue was grandmother would pass information down to the mother, to the child. So the wisdom and the ancient meanings and everything were passed down. They weren't forgotten. And it was nearly 100 years later, I think it was about late 1970s, when they then passed the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And so the ceremonies could be...
That long?
Yeah. Oh, God.
We're back to what we were saying the other day when we were talking about something, another podcast, about the 1970s seeming like they're not very long ago. But,
no.
1970s, wow, that surprises me, but in some ways, yeah.
It does, doesn't it? But I think because we see the 1970s as part of our life, when you actually start to look back at a lot of the things that were forbidden, for banned, even for women, certain things that they couldn't do in certain parts, and still can't do in certain parts, like voting and owning property. There was lots of different stuff. So we see 1978 as very modern, very kind of near to us, but actually there was still a lot of things that weren't.
Yeah, you're right. Weren't
in place then, but so there were clear moments when a child became an adult, and that they moved from that childhood to having responsibilities, and the responsibilities were being part of the tribe, part of the community, a role to play, everybody working together. So that I think that they were very important. I mean, were you going to say something about?
Well, about the Western sort of outlook on this. Well, I'm a bit of I really love Middle Ages, medieval, Tudor, Stuart history, and so I've always been fascinated by their ideas of childbirth, because you probably heard of churching.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what churching is, So that's
40 days, yeah. 40 days
right.
if it's a girl, 20 if it's a boy.
Yes. So that's just part of it. They had a lot of rituals and things during pregnancy and during childbirth and after. So we're talking about probably not as far back as, but say about, I'm guessing here, about 1100 up to the 1600s, something like that. And then it started to fade off a little bit. But churching, that we're going to talk about in a minute, that actually didn't stop until the 1960s. That was still happening for a lot of people in the 1960s, which I was really shocked by. But so when a woman became...
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, being brought up as a
Catholic.
That doesn't...
I know. I thought you might say that. So when a woman became pregnant, obviously, in every culture, going as far back as you can, there have always been worries about what's going to happen, because these days we have a lot more medical interventions that we can use. Yeah. But in childbirth, in days past, as I'm sure we're all aware, it was pretty dangerous. So, yeah, I've always thought Middle Ages, Tudor, childbirth, no thank you, actually. No thank you very much at all. And sadly, it was kind of a woman's lot, because as you were saying just now about property and things like that, women didn't really have a lot of agency, and they sort of really, mostly, not all of them, it's a generalisation, accepted that their lot was to bear children. And and in a lot of cultures, and including ours, it was seen as something to be respected for if you had lots of boys, lots of heirs. And when you start getting to nobility in the royal family, then obviously you've got money and goods and titles to inherit. So boys are more important because of primogeniture, which is, you know, boys inheriting. So babies were important, basically. They were a status symbol in a lot of ways. And women would be married quite young. Very unusual, to be honest, even back then, to be married before sort of 15, although people talk about it as being very common. It did happen, but it wasn't very common.
Yeah.
But during pregnancy, really interesting, you know, you have babies that sadly are born with issues, disabilities and things like that, because of the way that they thought about religion in those days. And it was very strict, yeah. And there was evil, sin, the devil, you know, and then there was God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and all the good stuff, yeah. So you had to stay on that side. But if a baby was born with problems, very often it was believed that the mother had been doing something evil, yeah, or adultery, or she'd been practicing witchcraft or something like that. And so if the baby was born with a problem, then that was blamed on the mother.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of evil things about, you know, a lot of sin about that she could unknowingly sort of get connected with and be touched by. So then began this time of lying in. Yeah. So lying in was basically a time of about 4 to 6 weeks before the baby was born, when you would go into what was called a lying in chamber. But it's kind of like a womb made out of fabric, really. And this could be a very sort of basic room in a normal house with people that didn't have very much money, or a corner of that room, but they still had it, yeah, to keep the woman and the child safe. So there was less chance of them being affected by anything that might cause illness, death, disability, whatever. But if people could afford it, they would have, in beautiful big houses, they would have these massive rooms. And so all the windows and the doors would be shut, and that would be to keep out sin. And to keep the woman away, and to keep the light out, because they wanted to keep her away from miasma as well, because miasma was like smells and gases. They didn't really understand. They were halfway there. So we understand that how bacteria and germs grow and thrive. And they thought it was from smells. You could get some illnesses from smells, evil smells, as they called it. So they were kind of there, because if you think about rotten meat or something, you know, it's going to get fly eggs on it, it's going to get bacteria, and it's usually smelly. So they were kind of there. They kept all that away from the woman, and she would stay in this chamber. She wasn't completely on her own, but it was very much a female domain. And so she would have her mother, perhaps some friends, family, that sort of thing, all female. They would be called her gossip, because they would keep her company, and they would gossip together about all sorts of different things. Gossip has perhaps different connotations now, but they were actually called her gossips. And they would sit there with her. There were physicians and doctors around, but they would be outside the room and would only be called on if essential. But most of the time they had nothing to do with what was going on in this sort of female enclave. Midwife would be there very often, from the Middle Ages right the way through. But very often they would start as time went on, they needed to have a license that was granted by the Catholic Church for them to be able to practice. That didn't come in till a few hundred years later. But that did happen at one point. They'd have to have a license to practice. So she would be there. So she's the midwife. She's in charge. She's a female sort of, I don't know, general of what's going on. But also the mothers, etc., would all be there, bringing their own ancestral wisdom. So there still is this connection, even though this has become very religious, very Christian, very more of a modern kind of religion than our ancient ancestors had, or tribal religions had. That ancestral connection is still there. But they would do some interesting things. For example, there was something called sympathetic magic that they used. Sympathetic magic meant opening drawers and cupboards, undoing laces on anything around the mother. And this was during pregnancy, towards the end of pregnancy, and while they were in the lying-in chamber, undoing buckles, because it represented the birth canal opening. So everybody around them would be doing this. They would also be praying and chanting. There would be holy relics, because they believed very much in the saints. So the mother perhaps would have like a vial of supposed saint's blood. We all know that, mostly that was kind of pig's blood from the farmer down the road or something like that. But in those days, they didn't know that. And so they would hold that. And the chanting and the herbs, and special herbs, purified water. They would put what they call precious stones in. So we're thinking crystals, crystal healing. There is so much in here that sort of spreads backwards and forwards in our history. And obviously, the chance of dying from something like what they call childbed fever, which is an infection after birth, was quite high. So, and dying during pregnancy, baby getting stuck. They didn't have the medical interventions we have now. They would often wear what they called a birthing girdle. And this birthing girdle was either made of like paper, papyrus, and it would have religious texts and symbols on it, and also pictures of saints to keep the woman safe during it. And very often it was not just across the stomach, it was kind of a sacred way of putting it all the way around the body. And there was a very famous one, because that was kind of for the average person. But richer people, they would have a fabric one, and there was one called the Girdle of Our Lady, very famous one that was kept at Westminster Abbey. And so you would get people like Elizabeth of York, who was Henry VIII's mother. Somebody like her, a queen, would have that and keep that on her. This became a massive thing for the Tudor dynasty. Margaret Beaufort, I said about people not having babies too young. She was one of those very sad exceptions. So Margaret Beaufort, she was Henry VIII grandmother, so Henry VII's mother, and she actually had such a bad time. She got pregnant when she was 12. She was married off very young. Yeah. And Henry VIII's father, he was born when she was 13. And you can imagine, without going into grim detail, what a terrible time that poor little girl had. Yeah.
But this goes back even further, because, way back, they would have, I think I might have mentioned before, little pottery bowls, and around it, inside it, would be an image of a demon, and then there would be a hymn or a prayer toward Lilith and other demons, and these would be placed around the birthing room. And the woman would have amulets, everything to keep the mother and child safe from demons, and particularly from Lilith. We've talked about that.
Poor old Lilith. Yeah.
I know it absolutely. So these are the kind of practices, and again, mortality in childbirth and mortality amongst newborns was very high, because a lot of them were very young and no more than children themselves, and a lot of them had also had multiple births. So this is kind of something that's kind of continued.
Well, isn't it one of those examples of the Christian church taking bits of pagan and ancestral magic and wisdom?
Because temporarily, if they thought that a child was going to die, the midwife was allowed to baptize the child. but then that changed afterwards. That was stopped. Then they were banned from doing that.
Well, it
But
had to be a bloke, had to be a priest, didn't it? You couldn't have women doing that. But I was
yeah,
talking about Margaret Beaufort and how young she was.
yeah,
So she was Henry VIII's granny. She gave birth to his father when she was 13. And because she had such a bad time, she made this lying in chamber thing a massive deal. And she actually wrote a document with all the rules on it, called the Ordinance, to make sure that the woman was enclosed in there. There were certain things that were allowed, certain things that weren't, to make sure the Tudor dynasty continued and that all the children to come from her son and her grandson were safe, because of this awful thing that she had been through. That was her only experience of childbirth, because she was so wrecked by it, she couldn't have any more children. So I think that's why she got so focused on it. But as you were saying about babies, there was apparently, they hoped when a baby was born, it would sneeze, because that would be getting rid of the sin of the conception. And they swaddled them, not just to keep them physically straight, but to keep them spiritually straight. So that was the baby. And they would be baptized, often by a midwife originally, but then by a priest. And then and that was in case of, like you say, infant mortality, as we say. And the mother would stay in the lying-in chamber for up to 40 days afterwards. And then she would be churched, as you say, churched. And that was to make sure that she was clean and purified. The baby was purified by the baptism, and hopefully he sneezed a bit. And then, so she was like ready to come back into the religious world and part of the community. And the saint that was really prevalent at the time was St. Margaret. I think it's St. Margaret of Antioch. And I'll just tell you this before we move on. She became the patron saint of childbirth because apparently she was swallowed by a dragon and then she burst out of its stomach. And that's how she became the patron saint of childbirth. And they would call on her all the time.
Oh, okay. Well, just quickly before we move on from this, when you were talking about churching, and for those of you that don't know or haven't heard that term, it's usually when it's before you can go back out into society that you had to be churched after giving a baby. Now, it was 20 days if you had a boy, 40 days if you had a girl. But if the boy was circumcised, they used to like to get the boys circumcised in certain cultures within 8 days, because that was the kind of crucial time to keep him safe from the devil and evil things. So, so it was quite a big thing. It really was, wasn't it? Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a brilliant example, Kathy. Really, I mean, we don't think about how much thought and what people kind of believe in what's going to happen, because all of these birth, death, everything, they're all threshold moments. They're all kind of crossing over moments.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the other thing that the next stage, of course, I mean, obviously you go from childhood, you go to motherhood, and when you become an elder. Now, there's never been a specific kind of time scale for when you become old. It was like 60s or 70s or 80s, but it was seen as a time when you had gained wisdom and you were called, and I think we should all be called elders, not old age pensioners. So I think let's start a campaign that we only ever say elders, because elders had got respect from the community from what they were. Today they're often marginalised. And to me, I think menopause is a natural marker for women. But up until recently, very, very recently, we've not talked about that. We've not talked about menopause. It's been hidden. It was, I was watching Downton Abbey the other day, and what was it, the Lord of the Manor? I've got Robert, the Lord of the Manor. Somebody, the doctor, had mentioned something about time of her age, menopause. Oh God, don't, please don't talk about it. And it was absolutely disgusting that they were possibly going to talk about something to do with the female anatomy. But I mean, it was true, and we've only really started talking about menopause and the effect that it has on women.
I think some of that as well is because we're living longer.
We are living longer.
People get to menopause, whereas our ancestors, many of them didn't get to that stage.
Yeah, but also, I think our ancestors didn't have a ceremony or an understanding of it. It was more of a natural progression
Yeah.
into a wise elder of the village. In fact, we mentioned this in the witch trials, but if you haven't seen that, I'll just tell you again. So during the witch trials, they believed that if you were when a woman was menstruating, menstrual blood was very, very powerful, but it was a way of getting rid of any danger or power or evilness within the body. When a woman got older and stopped, when she went into menopause, they thought that blood had nowhere to go, and so it poisoned her, and she was more likely to be seen as a witch. So it was all. It's been very much kind of concentrated on that. So I think that certainly what I like to see when I look at some of the indigenous cultures, the elders of the community have got seen as a real strength of the community. You know, they're seen for their wisdom, and I think certainly in the West we don't have that same respect.
Well, it was like we were talking about with the maiden mother crone. You
Yeah.
know, this eternal youth thing, as if
Yeah.
youth is the only part of life to be valued, which is absolute rubbish. They all have their own value and beauty.
Yeah. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was death. I mean, death was sacred. We fear death, but the ancients, they prepared the body for its journey to the underworld. It was seen as a continuation of life. It wasn't seen as an end of life. And today it's kind of managed behind closed doors. And I'm going to talk a bit about ceremonies in a minute. But one of the things that, and forgive me if you can disagree with me, but one thing that really upsets me is all these adverts on television for these cremations where you don't have a funeral, you can have a memorial ceremony, but the body's not there. It's going to be taken off by someone you don't know to another part of the country and cremated. And that really, really upsets me, because I think that it's taken away something so vital.
Yeah.
Whenever I've been to a funeral, the person that has died has been present in the coffin there, but they're part of that. And it's a chance to say goodbye, and it's a chance to say stories. And I don't see that as morbid, I see that as respect. And I see it as closure.
Oh, yeah.
And this, I don't know, this is my opinion. The thought that somebody would take away my loved one, and I don't know where, already, the bodies of our loved ones are prepared and cared for by strangers, professionals. Because before...
It never used to be, though. It never used to be. It never used to do it. The family would wash the body and lay it out. And in Ireland, I think, I don't know if it still happens.
Here as well. I mean, the family, they would wash and dress the body. They would prepare it for death. They would sit vigil. They would cover the mirrors, because it was believed that two reasons. One, that the focus had to be on the person that had died, not on you. But equally, the mirror was seen as that it could be attract the soul that was leaving the body and trap it. They would they would stop clocks because time had stopped for that person.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. I knew about the curtains closing, because that happened in my lifetime. When my grandfather died, I was living in the same house, and I was 8, and I remember all the curtains being closed. And people don't seem to do that anymore, do they?
Open the window so that the soul could be free. So, and candles were lit, and people would sit in vigil for a day or 2 days, and they would tell stories, and it was about a celebration of the life of that person that's died, and it was about seeing that life as sacred and saying goodbye. And so the thought, that doesn't happen. We do. We have wonderful ceremonies. I've been to some wonderful ones where we do celebrate that life. But I think that the person that's died's got to be there. I think they've got to be there personally, and not taken off by someone you don't know what's happening, and you hope and believe that they've been treated very respectfully. I'm sure they are, but it's that not knowing. I don't think I would ever have that closure. And if you look at kind of the Hindu. Their family prepared the body, and it's usually the eldest son traditionally, that would then perform the funerary rites. It was seen as a family thing. They would be cremated within a day, and then their ashes would be put into a sacred river, like the Ganges, for instance. But the mourning and the remembrance ceremonies could go on for a week, 2 weeks, a month. It could even go on for a year, because it was about remembering that person. So I think that some of the death ceremonies we've had are rich and powerful and not morbid, but
the Viking funeral pyres, and going off on the Viking boat, gypsies.
Yeah,
Gypsies in the they burn the caravan of the person with the person in it, because that's their celebration. Yeah.
One of the
should I say Romanies? Sorry, I should have said Romanies then. I apologise to anybody. Don't want to offend them.
Okay, yeah. So another again looking at kind of the indigenous Native American tribes. Not all of these, but some of them would have a tree ceremony. So the deceased would be laid out on a platform in a tree high up. So it would be above the ground, so that animals didn't get the body. And it would be closer to the skies, and it would be left there to decompose naturally in the elements, and then later on the bones would be taken down and maybe buried with loved ones. So, but it was also really important for them to do. Now, one of the things that happened, now when was it? When was the 1500s, when the Spanish invaded? Or went across to
the New World, yeah.
And then that meant that many of the tribes and the communities were subjected to diseases and things that they had no immunity to, and in some of the tribes it wiped out.
Watch your podcast on Rapa Nui, Easter Island. You'll hear more about that. Just to put that
it wiped out about 85%. And so the death had been treated as sacred, but suddenly they became very afraid of death. And there were times, but because it was a time to give thanks for those that died, but suddenly everybody was dying, and they were afraid, and often people would be left out to die because they didn't want to be contaminated. And so it changed things, and where death wasn't feared before, it was seen as a continuation. Suddenly it was feared. Now when you get fears like that, and you get stuff about fears of childbirth like Lilith and whatever, those are passed down. Like we talk about ancestral memories and things being passed down, but those fears are passed down.
Of course they are. Yes.
Yeah, we don't always know where they've come from. And then that's exacerbated by some of the other things that we hear, going to hell, going to purgatory, what have you. So, so what I said at the beginning was there's not just one reason why some of the kind of transitions and ceremonies and sacred rites have changed or died out. There's multiple reasons.
Just say at this point, Wynne, that if everybody hopefully is enjoying this podcast, they must subscribe, please. That would be fabulous. We would so appreciate it. Just have to interrupt you to make sure I mentioned that.
We always forget, and we're rubbish, aren't we?
Anyway. We really enjoy the conversations we're having. We were saying before we started this one that sometimes we actually forget that we're recording something because we just get into the conversation. We're passionate about it.
Yeah. Anyway, but I mean, so really, to me, death. Well, in fact, all of these ceremonies is kind of like death of the old. So you're suddenly saying goodbye to childhood. You're becoming an adult. You're saying goodbye to life on this earth, moving into the next stage, and you're continuing your journey. It was never, we never really saw it as like an ending. It was a continuation
Yeah.
of the journey. I mean, it just I was going to mention also Victorians. The Victorians photographed their dead. Now there are some, and these are rarer than you think, that where they painted their eyes, but they didn't always. There was only a rare few. But photography was quite new. It was expensive, and sometimes it would be the last thing they would have to see of their child or their loved one, because once they'd gone. I mean, today we have lots of photographs, but this was a way of, so whilst in some respects it might have been seen as morbid, it was a chance to keep an image of their loved one.
And they would sometimes as well keep their hair in a necklace,
They
or
did.
make it into brooches or something that a family could wear.
A mourning brooch, they did, yeah.
Yeah.
And colours, I think, like we see black as mourning,
Yeah.
and that really came in more after Queen Victoria. But if you look at kind of East Asia, people would wear white for funerals, still wear white for funerals.
But the
So,
Victorian era was dark, was black. If
yes,
you think about the black smoke,
yeah,
I have this big theory, which I've mentioned before, and I'll probably mention again. So just humour me. That the Industrial Revolution and that time was responsible for a lot of society going a bit dark and going a bit wrong, and so the blackness is all part of the energy of that time.
yeah. And it's also seen about that the light, the lack of light, the light's finished for that person. They've got into the dark, they've got into the underworld, whatever that may be for whichever culture, to continue their journey. So it's about, it's almost like sympathetic magic, I suppose, in a way. It's about not being with them physically because they've died, but it's about we're still with you. And
There is
again,
a place. There is a place as well. I've just popped into my head. We're going to finish up soon, but I just had to mention this. There is a place. I think it's in Sicily, in the catacombs, where they've got people still in there, and because of the atmosphere in this place, you can go down and look at it, and people are sort of preserved to a certain degree. Their clothing is and everything, but obviously they've sort of decomposed a bit. But some of them do look as if it wasn't that long ago that they died. But obviously, the weird thing about that is the body shrinks, and so
yeah,
the clothes
yeah.
look bigger, so it's almost a bit more ghoulish. But that was another way of almost like not wanting to let go of people, being able to keep them.
But our burial rites go back thousands and thousands and
Yeah, they
thousands.
do.
I mean, people would be, very early burials were found where people would be covered in red ochre. They would have sacred ritual items with them. They would be buried in the fetal position. They were
The
going
Egyptians, look at the Egyptians, what they did.
they were going back into the womb of the earth. Even before that, though. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it was seen as something sacred, and I think there's something very special, and I feel to be quite honoured to actually take part in the funeral for someone, to celebrate their life and then to go into the next world rather than just sent off with strangers. And that's one of the things that kind of upsets me. It worries me that we don't have those sacred rites anymore, and I think that there is a lot of people that are wanting to kind of replenish those. And
Well, you get, talking about doulas, you get death doulas. I don't know an awful lot about them, but I would imagine these are original doula that I was going to talk about. I'll talk about death doulas in a minute, but a doula is when it comes to birth. That's the one I'm talking about. And I think doulas generally are people that, correct me if I'm wrong, they kind of help you through passages of life. And birth doulas, this is kind of getting back to our old ancestral practices. So they are people that help women in pregnancy, childbirth and postpartum. And so they work with them. And instead of, it's just being a medical sort of practice, kind of like, you're having a baby, get the drugs out, do what you need to do, get it out as quick as possible, forceps and all those horrible things. They actually work with the mother. So the mother gets in touch with herself and her ancestry and her ancestral wisdom, and they help them with herbs and incense and breathing techniques, and they get her ready like mothers and grandmothers and extended family would have done with our ancestors hundreds, thousands of years ago. And then they're with them during the whole process of the birth. And then after the birth, these days women have a baby in a hospital and then, get the midwife or the health visitor coming to visit. But this is a massive experience, birth. I mean, I've only had one child, but I remember it's massive. It's not something that happens every day. And so they stay with that mother, and they visit very regularly, and they do something. One of the ceremonies they do is a closing of the bones ceremony. Apparently it started in Ecuador. And what they do is they kind of bind the bones up, and they use different fabrics and different amulets and things like that. I don't know the whole thing. But basically what they're doing is this woman has been in this traumatic experience where everything's still very open. The birth canal is open to infection or just the fact that she doesn't feel whole again. And if the birth was particularly traumatic, they see it as even more important. And so they do this closing of the bones ceremony, and it closes the birth canal so that she is back to how she was, not before, because she's gained extra wisdom and all the rest of it, but it's like a closure and a celebration in itself. And death doulas, I would imagine what they would do is they would help the family through the process of death and be with that person.
Yeah. It's like a midwife to the soul.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think, to be fair, I think we could do several more hours on this because there's so much.
We don't have time.
Yeah, we don't have time, but I mean, there is so much. But I mean, it is fascinating, and I do think that we avoid having the conversation about death, for instance, and we do because of the fear. And I do think that
it's something that's going to happen to every single one of us, without doubt, unless something particularly miraculous happens, which I think is unlikely.
Yeah, but anyway, so I think that gosh, I can't believe time's gone so quickly, and I feel like we've still got so much to talk about. Anyway, we are going to have to go this time, but please join us again, because our next podcast is going to be on creation stories. Now, I absolutely love learning about all the different creation stories, and if you follow me on Facebook, you probably know that because I'm always writing about them. But there are so many across the world, different myths. So looking at ancient Sumeria, ancient Greece, and all over ancient Egypt. So we're going to be talking about creation stories and the myths and the beliefs around it, and what they actually mean and what they actually meant when people for life and history and the kind of the turning of the seasons. So there's a lot to look at. So we'll be looking at Tiamat from ancient Mesopotamia and Gaia from ancient Greece.
Don't forget Adam and Eve.
Oh, Adam and Eve, yeah. Well, they do come into it, yeah, but they were much later. They created the world long after it had been created.
Of course, yeah.
So yes, no, I think that we will be talking about them. They're quite an important part of the story. But so we'll be talking about creation stories, creation myths, and as ever, we would love to hear from you. So if you either contact us or message via the YouTube videos or on either of our Facebook pages, which the details are on the bottom of our YouTube page. So we would love to hear A, what you're interested in, B, what you think about it, and if there's anything that we haven't covered that you'd like us to expand a bit more. So for now, we will say goodbye and thank you, Kathy. It's been really lovely talking to you again. And,
always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, Wyn. And I mean that. I was going to say most sincerely. Who used to say that? I don't know. I'm not saying it. But I mean it very sincerely. And so we really enjoy this and we hope you're enjoying it. And please, if you do, a like and a subscribe goes a long way. Thank you very much.
it makes a big difference to us, even if you don't watch everything we've written, what we've done, which I hope you will. But yes, subscribe because it
I
helps.
just realised as well, I said, thank you most sincerely. And then at the end, I said, thank you very much. And I sounded a bit like Elvis. So I think I've been channeled by random people,
Yeah.
celebrities from the past. But
Okay.
apart from that, it's time for us to go.
So, bye-bye. Okay, thank
Bye
you.
for now.
Bye, everyone.